It was barely sunrise when I heard the rumble of diesel engines. At first, I thought it was roadwork, until I saw it. A bulldozer creeping across the misty lake, heading straight for the stone bridge my great-grandfather built in 1923. By the time I sprinted to the water's edge, men in hard hats were already tearing into a century of family history. But here's the mistake the HOA made. They thought they could bulldoze me into submission. What they didn't realize, I controlled the dam. And by the end of that day, their $4 million resort would be mud. Before I tell you how it all went down, you need to understand what that bridge meant to me. My great-grandfather, Samuel Morrison, came home from the Great War with scars on his body and determination in his soul. In 1923, with nothing but hand tools and limestone from a nearby quarry, he built a stone arch bridge that connected our family's cabin to the main road. This wasn't just any bridge. It was a lifeline. Farmers hauled produce across it. Fishermen carried their catches. Kids ran barefoot across it in the summer. For 100 years, it wasn't just stone and mortar. It was the heartbeat of our community. Growing up, I'd fish with my grandfather on that same bridge. My wife and I dreamed of retiring here, fixing up the cabin, and raising our children where history lived in every stone. Every crack in the limestone, every worn edge of the railing, it all told a story of resilience and legacy. So, when the HOA looked at that bridge and saw nothing but a nuisance, when they saw non-compliance instead of history, they didn't just threaten concrete. They threatened everything my family stood for, and I wasn't about to let that happen. Her name was Linda Prescott, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA, you already know the type. Perfectly pressed suits, pearl necklace to the grocery store, spotless white BMW that never touched a dirt road. She moved into the new luxury community across the lake and within months clawed her way to HOA president. My first encounter with her came in the form of a certified letter. It was thick, heavy, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. Inside was a declaration. My bridge violated community aesthetic standards and had to be removed within 30 days. If I didn't comply, $500 per day in fines. I actually laughed when I first read it. My bridge was built decades before her entire neighborhood even existed. How could some HOA covenant apply to something older than the HOA itself? But when I showed up at the board meeting with original deed records, survey maps, and even a grandfathering clause, Linda barely glanced at my papers before smiling that condescending smile that still makes my blood boil. Times change, Mr. Morrison. Progress requires sacrifice. And just like that, the board voted 5-2 in favor of enforcement. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules. This was about power. Linda had decided that my old bridge, and by extension, me, didn't fit her picture-perfect neighborhood. And she wasn't going to stop until I was gone. The fines started first. Then came the compliance patrols. Every morning, 2 men in matching polo shirts and clipboards strolled my property line, jotting down violations. Grass too long. Mailbox wrong shade of black. Storage shed needs repainting. Fishing net visible from the road. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so relentless. Within weeks, I had over $1,200 in fines. But Linda's real weapon wasn't paper citations, it was people. Slowly, neighbors who once waved started avoiding me. Sarah, my wife, came home from the grocery store with tears in her eyes. The cashier wouldn't make eye contact. The woman from the flower shop acted like she had the plague. It was all whispers. His difficult. His lowering property values. That bridge is dangerous. And the worst part? The HOA was paying Linda's husband's security company thousands a month to harass me. I later learned his license had expired months before. Illegal. But that didn't stop them. That was the day I stopped feeling like a neighbor and started feeling like a target. I'm an engineer. I solve problems. And when faced with this kind of nonsense, I did what any good engineer does. I dug into the system. First discovery, Linda's husband's security company had been operating illegally for months. Expired license, no renewals. Second, her pristine backyard deck, built without permits. Her Japanese garden trespassed 3 feet into my property line. Her pool house? Over the setback limit. Third, HOA funds. Thousands had been funneled into emergency contractor services. Every single company was tied to her husband or brother-in-law. I filed complaints. I brought evidence to the board. I laid it all out like a winning poker hand. And do you know what happened? Nothing. Linda didn't flinch. She didn't even deny it. She just smiled and said, "Community vision matters more than personal history." That's when I understood. Evidence didn't matter. The law didn't matter. She thought she had me trapped. She was wrong. While Linda was busy playing HOA tyrant, I was in the county archives digging through dusty boxes of old files. And that's when I found it, the documents my great-grandfather left behind. Turns out, when he built that bridge, he wasn't just stacking limestone. He was integrating it into the dam's secondary flow system. And buried in those records was something incredible: secondary water rights. Rights that gave my family legal authority to control how much water stayed in the lake. Think about that for a second. Linda's precious resort, her boat docks, her lakefront dining, her million-dollar water features, they all depended on one thing: stable water levels. And suddenly, I realized I held the one card Linda never saw coming: the power to drain her entire empire. Word must have spread that I wasn't backing down, because Linda came back swinging harder. She called an emergency safety meeting. She paraded in a so-called structural engineer who'd never even seen my bridge but happily declared it a death trap. The board voted 7-1 to demolish it immediately. The next morning, demolition crews rolled in. But I was ready. I filed an emergency injunction with the county court. Within an hour, the judge granted a temporary restraining order. Demolition stopped. When I called Linda to tell her the news, her voice went ice cold. "Then this is war, Mr. Morrison." She had no idea just how right she was. The day of the showdown looked like something out of a movie. Reporters, police, neighbors lining the road. Even investors from Dallas showed up, calculating how much money they were about to lose. Linda arrived in her white BMW, flanked by private security guards. She held up a thick folder and screamed to the cameras. "This man is a domestic terrorist. He wants to destroy our community." But I wasn't there to yell. I was there with facts. I handed the sheriff a folder of my own: century-old water rights documents, surveys, and legal rulings. The sheriff read them carefully, then nodded. He has federal jurisdiction here. You need to step aside." Linda lost it. "This is insane. You're going to let him ruin a $4 million investment because of some piece of paper from 1923. I didn't answer her. Instead, I walked to the concrete housing of the bypass valve. The crowd held its breath as I turned the massive wheel. At first, nothing. Then a deep rumble shook the ground. Water surged through the secondary channels, roaring like thunder. Within minutes, the lake began to drop. By the time the sun hit its peak, Linda's resort docks were stranded in mud. Her dream of a luxury opening? Gone. And in that moment, the underdog finally won. The fallout was swift. The resort's loan was called in. Investors pulled out. Linda was charged with financial misconduct and misuse of HOA funds. Her husband lost his license permanently. The new board, led by longtime neighbors, declared the bridge a historic landmark. They even created a heritage trail, making the bridge the centerpiece of our community once again. Property values didn't crash like Linda warned. They skyrocketed. Turns out, people liked living in a place with real history. As for me, I walk that bridge every morning now. The same limestone blocks my great-grandfather laid with his own hands. And every time I hear the water rushing below, I remember this simple truth. Bullies win when you let them rewrite the story. But if you know your history, if you understand the law, and if you're willing to fight for what matters, sometimes the underdog drains the lake.